Hello everyone. I'm really excited to be with all of you here today. My name is Milan Stojanov and I work for a company called eCommistry. We are specialized in Magento development, and for the most of the time we're still working with Magento 1. But there are some clients who already want Magento 2. So that's why I'm here. I just wanted to share some experiences with you that we recently had. But before that, what I wanted to show you is this slide. And this is my original talk title, and that is how to change logo in Magento 2 in less than 2 hours. Because in the first couple of weeks of working with the platform, I felt exactly like this guy here. So I didn't like it, obviously. I was sort of lost and confused, but I was thinking it was really okay, because this is not just a new numbered version, like going from 1.8 to 1.9. This is completely new platform. And there are quite a lot of changes here. Magento 2 uses a modern tech stack. It has a new architecture, and yeah, there are quite a lot of changes which look very scary the first couple of days of working with it. But in reality, once you get over that initial hurdle of figuring out how Magento 2 works on the architectural level, you start seeing a lot of familiar things. So, to give you a simple overview, high-level picture, when we are talking about upgrading to Magento 2, we can split this task into two separate pieces. One is database migration, and another is code-based migration. For the database migration, we need to upgrade structure, which are like tables and relations between them. And we also need to upgrade data, which are records in those tables. This is a completely new topic, but I wanted to mention that Magento has published the official tool for this, which is called Database Migration Tool, which drastically helps you with this process. I was able to migrate my 1.7 database to version 2.1 in a couple of days, so it's really good. And for the code-based migration, it's a little bit more complex, because there are multiple things that needs to be done, and all of them needs to be treated in a different way. So we have Magento framework and core modules, we have third-party extensions, we have custom extensions, and we also need to upgrade themes. On our radar for today is going to be this section here, custom extensions, simply because for the framework and core modules, there's no effort for doing it. You just replace all framework files and all core modules, and that's about it. For the third-party extensions, ideally you would like to let your vendor do it for you. Or if it's not possible for some reason, it's going to fall down to this section here, and you can consider it as upgrading custom module. And for the themes, it's part for the front-end developer, and I can't talk more about it. So one of the first questions that you may ask yourself is, what's in the scope for upgrading a custom module? So how do we actually start working on it? These are some of the major things that will be on your to-do list. You'll need to create a new directory structure. You'll need to convert configuration files to match new Magento 2 format. You will also need to split layout files that also need to use new syntax and new Magento 2 format. And finally, the biggest part of the whole puzzle is upgrading PHP code. And if you have enough time for this, or if you're simply doing this for learning in a couple of times, I highly recommend for doing this manually, simply because in that way you'll get the best possible learning experience. However, that's not something that you would like to do on a daily basis, because you'll find yourself repeating the same tasks over and over for every extension that you work on. So you will need to find some way to automate this stuff. And thankfully, Magento has published the official tool for this, which is called Code Migration Tool. It's available on GitHub, and once you get there to the GitHub page, you will see really nice documentation, very well explained, But if you're more like visual learner, like me, for example, there is a great presentation on using code migration tool by Sergey Shipko. So it's available on YouTube, and I highly recommend for you to check it out. He explains it in detail. But essentially, what this extension does, it accepts Magento 1 extension as an input. It does its magic, and then it produces the output that should be compatible with Magento 2. But in order for this tool to be working, you'll need to make some preparations. You'll need to create 4 different folders. One is source folder, which is where you put Magento 1 extension that needs to be converted. You'll also need to create an empty destination folder. This is where the tool is going to produce the output. And you also need to provide 2 more folders. One is Magento 1 and another is Magento 2. These instances don't need to be installed actually. They're here to provide a little bit more context for the tool. And as you can see, in Magento 1 folder, you need to put the same code that exists in source folder. So that's about preparation. And because this tool is a command line tool, you will have 4 different commands available to you. The first one migrates directory structure. The second one migrates layout. The third one migrates config files. And finally, the last one migrates PHP code. And now, you may be thinking, well, if this tool is available, I don't need to manually upgrade my Magento 1 extension. But that's not going to work, that's not going to happen, because as we said, this tool is only a starting point for converting your extensions. For example, for me, this tool worked very well for the first 3 steps, but for the PHP code, it didn't. It doesn't even run the code, it is just doing some static analysis on it, and based on the internal mappings that it has, it is doing conversion. But generally, you will need to open every single file that is generated by this tool and fix the errors. So to be able to do this, let's review some of the most important changes for Magento 2 developer. I'll start with module directory structure. In Magento 2, a module is still a folder as in Magento 1, but because we don't have the concept of code pools anymore, we put our code directly under app code. The naming convention is still the same. We use vendor name underscore module name. And inside of a module, we have pretty similar type of classes that already existed in Magento 1. For example, we still have block classes, controller classes, models, helpers. There is etc folder still remaining, but there are also some new. For example, API folder is new. There is a setup, which is essentially the same as SQL folder in Magento 1. There's also test folder, where we provide tests for our extension, and you can't see the whole folder, but we also have view folder, because that's one of the biggest changes for the extension. Everything that is related to the view layer for your extension now is the part of the module, of the extension. So if your extension needs to have your template files or layout files or even static files like CSS, JavaScript, and CSS, all of this goes into this view folder. What has also changed is the way how we register our module. Unlike the Magento 1, where we use only one file for registering our module, now we have 2 files. One is registration.php file, which is very simple. All you need to do is to replace on line 7, like I did here, and everything else remains the same. And this file sits under the root of your extension. There's also a module XML file that sits under etc folder of your extension, and it's also some kind of boilerplate code. If your extension depends on some other Magento 2 extension, you can define that dependency under the sequence tags, like I did here. For example, this extension depends on Magento widget. And for the third-party extensions that doesn't ship with Magento, you're advised to use Composer. If you're not familiar with Composer, it's a package manager for PHP, which is extremely popular today in the community, because every single project now is using Composer. So if you need some kind of external library, you just create a Composer JSON file in the root of your extension. You define the dependency, like I did here on line 5. Actually, this is the sample from the core. And that's it. With the simple commands, these extensions will be pulled in for you. Some of the most important XML configuration that you should be aware of. The biggest change is that, like in Magento 1, where we put almost everything in config XML file, now we have multiple files that we can use depending on our needs. These files are more meaningful but smaller, like everything else in Magento, as you can see. So now we have a config XML file, which is now used for storing default configuration for our extension. We have some other files like events XML, which we use for defining observers. We have routes XML, cron tab, there are many more. The new one is this one, di.xml, which is used for configuring the object manager and dependency injection that we'll cover shortly. There's also one very good improvement about XML files. And if you remember back in the days when you worked on, when your extension didn't work, so you needed to spend many hours on trying to debug the typo that you made in your XML files, well, that cannot happen anymore because of this. Every single XML file is now validated against a particular set of rules. For example, widgets XML in Magento 1 looks like this, at least starts like this, and in Magento 2 it looks like this. So this line here means that widgets XML file needs to strictly follow the rules defined under widget XSD file. XSD stands for XML schema definition. So if you try to add some nodes that don't exist, that are not supported by the schema, PHP or even your text editor will show you an error, which is very, very helpful in the development process. For example, I was porting an extension that uses widgets, and it needed to have fields for uploading images. But that's not possible by default, since in this schema you're allowed to use only text, select, and multi-select widgets, multi-select fields. So in this case, what you do, you need to define your own schema definition file and say that widgets XML in your extension needs to be validated against your schema and not against the default one. If you run into some similar kind of problems, I wrote a blog post that covers how to solve it, so feel free to check it out. Some of the most important PHP changes. Of course, we can't cover all of them in the limited time we have, but at least let's see what's the most important. So we have namespaces instead of long class names. We have dependency injection instead of page class. New conventions for changing the core. And we'll finish this presentation by saying something about controllers too. Let's see one by one. Namespaces instead of long class names. So if you haven't been working with anything else beside Magento, this may be a new concept for you. But essentially, namespaces are a way of encapsulating classes. For example, category class can exist in multiple locations in our file system, and we needed to use long class names in order to be very specific about a particular category class. So when you're porting your extensions, you'll have to replace all long class names with corresponding namespaces. For example, eCommistry mainstream block category class simply becomes category with a proper namespace defined at the top. We also have, this is the biggest change in Magento 2, and that is that our good old friend mage class doesn't exist anymore. So wherever you see in your Magento 1 code, mage : something, that means that you'll need to somehow handle it. You'll need to find some replacement for it. Because Mage doesn't exist in the Magento 2 system anymore. So how do we actually instantiate object then? Generally, we don't do it alone. We don't do it manually. Because in Magento 2, it's a best practice to let the system handle everything for you. It's not your responsibility anymore. Instead, you let the object manager and dependency injection to handle this task. And it's really, really simple. What you do, you define the full path of the dependencies that you need in your class constructor, and Magento will sort of pick in here, it's going to figure it out, and it's going to instantiate all the classes that you need. This is really very important, and you will keep doing this every time, so this is the very simple flow. You define the full path of the class in your constructor, you create a protected property, and finally you save the instantiated object into the property so that you can access it later. But I'd like to give you one very important advice here, and that is that you should always try to keep your constructors very clean. And to show you what I mean, this example is from real class from the core. This is model catalog model product class, and as you can see, it has many dependencies inside of its constructor, which makes it really hard to read and to understand. And typically, when your class has multiple dependencies, that means that your code smells and that it's doing way too much. So always think about it when working with dependency injection. You should maybe try to split somehow your classes or make it simpler. Moving on to some concepts about dependency injection. I call this slide potential pitfalls, but let's rephrase it. Generally, you will need to request three types of classes in Magento 2. One is stateless, which we refer to injectables. The other is entities that we refer to as non-injectables. And finally, you will also see a lot of interfaces requested in the constructor. So what are injectables? Injectables are classes that can be passed directly to the constructor. For example, on the left, helpers are good examples of injectable classes. On the left is displayed how we can instantiate helper class in Magento 1. And on the right is how we do it in Magento 2. So, like we said, we just provide the full path of the class in the constructor, and the system is going to be able to instantiate this class for us automatically, which is not going to happen with non-injectables. So, simply, non-injectables are classes that cannot be passed directly to the constructor. Entities like models, resource models, collections, these are all good examples of non-injectable classes. Again, comparison between Magento 1 and Magento 2. On the left is how we instantiate a product model in Magento 1, and on the right is the example that doesn't work with Magento 2. It doesn't work because if we follow the same pattern as we did with helpers, by providing the full path of the product model, the system will not be able to instantiate this class. Instead, in these cases, we use factories. So, factory is a class that is named in the same way as the class that instantiates, suffixed with factory keyword. So, the working example of this would be, rather than instantiating Magento catalog model product, we are going to request Magento catalog model product factory, and that class will be able to instantiate the product object. And finally, I just want to quickly cover interfaces. Yes.
The last slide.
Yes.
So right now, I think in Magento 2.1, the load method is deprecated.
Which one?
The load method of the product is deprecated, and the product repository request to be used.
Yes, it can be used, but this is not that, at least from what I know. Yeah, we definitely need to use repositories, but this one also works in Magento. This example is used just to show clear distinction between injectables versus non-injectables. But yeah, your feedback is really good. And interfaces. Generally, Magento uses a lot of interfaces in its core, and it's a good habit to request interfaces, because in that way your class depends on some kind of contract and not on complete implementation. So when Magento sees something like this in its constructor, what it's going to do, it's going to look into di.xml file, and it's going to search for preferences node. And this is obviously a match it's going to find. So this line means that whenever someone requests Magento framework app config scope config interface, the system will actually instantiate Magento framework app config. Preferences can also be used for class rewrites in Magento 2, which leads us to our next topic, and that is new conventions for changing the core. So we have preferences, which we just said, but we also have observers and new concept called plugins. As we just seen in the previous example, preferences are the most to class rewrites in Magento 1. So this is how it works. On the left is again Magento 1. We use config.xml file to define our rewrites nodes. But in Magento 2 we use di.xml as we see, and we use preferences tags for that. On the PHP level there is basically no change. But again, I would like to give you another advice here, and that is that for when you rewrite the core, preferences should be your last option. You should, because it's simply not the best practice in Magento 2. Whenever possible, you should try to use either plugins or observers. And if none of that is possible, then this is your last option. Observers still exist in Magento 2 and are very good to use. This is comparison Magento 1 left, Magento 2 right. In Magento 1 we used config.xml file to define our observers, and the difference in Magento 2 is that we use events.xml file. And what is also changed is that you don't define what method will respond to a particular event, since it's by default execute method. It accepts observer object, and then inside of it you can do whatever you need to do in your observer. And finally, plugins. This is new concept in Magento 2 for rewriting core. However, the downside of using plugins is that they only work with public methods. So if you for some reason need to rewrite protected or private method, you cannot use plugins. And because we don't have enough time for covering plugins, I will just show you, again, on mageclass.com, there is a post, there is a screencast where I covered plugins in detail, so if you're interested in plugins, if you haven't checked them, you can check it out also. But essentially, just to give you a brief overview, if you have a public function getName in the core or wherever else where you need to rewrite it, you can define a plugin class, and you can have the methods in the same way as you would call them in plain English. So if you want to add some behavior before the original method is called, you can create before getName. If you need to add some changes after the events, to add some bit of code after the original method is called, you can use after getName. And you have also that round hook at the bottom, which is used for replacement for the original method. So this around getName will be executed in the same time as the original method is executing. So you can simply replace everything that you need inside. And finally, I will just say something about controllers, and that is that controllers have been broken down by action. So in Magento 1 we had we have pretty large controllers that can contain a lot of CRUD operations like index action or save action or delete action and so on. But as with most things in Magento 2, controllers have been also splitted. So every single action now goes into the separate controller. And every single controller have execute method, which is like main function in the controller, which performs some logic and it returns a response to the browser or whatever client it is. So, in conclusion, at least for me, I think Magento 2 is a big step forward because it forces us developers to sync up with the latest practices in software development. So we should not be scared to make a switch to it. I consider it as a level up for a professional career. If you work on porting your extensions, I would recommend that you need to start with the code migration tool, at least for the boilerplate tasks. But of course, you will need to improve things later. Also, one important thing is that you should never use Object Manager directly. If you search on Stack Overflow, there are too many answers that explain how to do something using Object Manager. That's not the best advice. So instead, you should always use dependency injection. But of course, keep things simple, keep class small. So basically, as we said, your constructors need to stay as clean as possible. And finally, the last advice that I would have is to practice interface-driven design, or to follow as it does in Magento 4. You should try to make your classes depend on interfaces and not on complete implementation. Thank you very much. And again, sorry for the delay at the very beginning. And one last thing before I finish. I mentioned a couple of times mageclass.com. This is our blog where me and my colleague Sinisha are posting some random thoughts on Magento 2. But now I'd like to announce something that we are working on. We call it Magento 2 Essential Training. It's going to be completely free, and this is our way of giving something back to the community. So if you're excited about this, if you like the idea, you can check it out. We imagined it to come out at October. And if you want to somehow join us or contribute, you're always welcome. So just wanted to let you know that. Thank you again.